Om Namah Shivaya. We'll take up this evening starting with Chapter 9, Verse 5 of Ribhu Gita. Ribhu is bestowing instruction upon his disciple Nadaga concerning the nature of Vidaha Mukti, disembodied liberation. In the preceding chapter, he had described Jivan Mukti, liberation while alive. The two descriptions, liberation while alive and liberation out of the body, are remarkably similar. Why is this? What is the nature of mukti? Of course, it can be said from the onlooker's point of view, which is merely assumed, that a Jivan Mukta can be described in terms of his peacefulness, his detachment, his wisdom, etc. But when he becomes Vidaha Mukti, when he enters that, how can he be described at all? Actually, mukti, liberation, is of one kind only. Even while alive, the mukta or sage has no conception of a body, no misidentification with a body, no idea of being an embodied being. Obviously, after the body drops off, he most certainly does not have such ideas. Well, enough of this. Let's listen to Ribhu. Verse 5, Ribhu says, I am myself, the self, the shining self, the self of all, just my own self, the unborn self, the immortal self. He who is thus is the Vidaha Mukta. Meditate on the profound significance of what he is declaring. First, I am myself, the self. It is the revelation of identity. That which is called the self, of the nature of Satchidananda, being, consciousness, bliss, is truly yourself, your only self. The identity or idea of having another self, to be bound, to be ignorant, to be caught up in illusion, is entirely delusive and merely imagined. I am myself, the self. What is the true significance of I? Inquire within yourself, who am I? And you will know with certainty that you, your very existence, is the self. I am myself, the shining self. In which way does it shine? It does not shine as if it were something visible to be seen with the eyes. That's not what is meant. Indeed, the self is utterly imperceptible to the senses. What then is the meaning of shining? It is knowing, knowledge. The self is of the nature of pure consciousness, the solitary knower. Of all things known, it is the knowledge, the knowing. It is shining and it is self-luminous. Consciousness knows its own existence without relying upon anything else in order to do so. Consciousness is your very existence. How do you know that you exist? Not by sensing, not by thinking. What kind of knowledge is this? It is non-objective knowledge, self-knowledge. And in the realization of the self, in mukti, liberation, the distinction of an individual knower to try to know the self is no more. In self-knowledge, or self-realization as we call it, the self knows itself by itself. Nothing else is involved. When you shine as pure consciousness, when you shine as pure knowledge, you are liberated as the shining self. The next phrase, the self of all. The self of all is the very existence of all. What is this existence? If you cease to misidentify with a body or as an individual ego entity, you will realize that your existence is the existence of all. It is not particularized, and it is ever undifferentiated. one who knows himself as just existence, existence alone, the infinite and eternal existence. Such a one attains Videha Mukti even while alive. After all, this description is not given to the dead. It is given to the living. And what would be supposedly realized later is existing now the same. For truth is, or reality is invariable, without beginning and without end. What is then is also now. I am myself, the shining self, the self of all, just my own self. Your self is not multiple, but only one. It is partless, and nothing else mixes with it. So he says, just my own self. That is, that alone is his identity. Not the self plus something, just the self. Just being. Not being this or that, just being. Just my own self. What else do you consider to be yourself in addition to the self? Question, inwardly inquire, discriminate, so that you realize the self just as it is. The unborn self. The notion I can be said to be born. Are you that? What is it that exists, if even before such a notion arises? From the I that is born, the mind is born. But are you that? What exists even when there is no mind? With the I assumed and the mind supposed, a body is born. Are you the body? Never is there a time when existence does not exist. Existence always exists. Your existence is unborn, and consequently, he says, the immortal self, it is imperishable. The distinction between the born and the unborn is that of between the unreal and the real. The unreal never is. The real always is. The reality is the existence of the self. Cease to misidentify as a body or as an individualized entity. And what Ribhu is declaring will be self-evident to you. I am myself, the shining self, the self of all, just my own self, the unborn self, the immortal self. He who is thus is the Vidaha Mukta. Verse 6. The blissful self, one's own dear self, the liberated self, and the settled, and thus one-pointed, is the Vidaha Mukta. Where being is, there is bliss. Your existence is your happiness. As Bhagavan has mentioned, something is dear to us because of its happiness. So he says, the blissful self, one's own dear self. Whatever it is that you regard as yourself, you hold dear. You love that. And you love that which brings you or reveals happiness. The bliss and the dearness are the same, and the self is that. So when you realize the self, you find a happiness, profound happiness that never comes to an end. The blissful self, one's own dear self, the liberated self. Usually we speak of the self as beyond the ideas of bondage and liberation. But here Ribhu points out the very same nature of the self from another angle of vision, saying it is the liberated self. Obviously, the ego cannot become liberated, for it is the epitome of bondage, the root of illusion, the cause of suffering, and actually does not exist. The self itself alone is liberated. From what is it liberated? From all of the imaginary bondage. Since the self is ever existent, such liberation is eternal. Therefore, for the sake of liberation, do not seek that which has a beginning and an end, but discern the eternal as your very existence, and the self is realized. Free, completely free. The blissful self, one's own dear self, the liberated self, and the settled. The Sanskrit word can be translated as certain. So you could say the certain or the settled. Of what are we certain? The next phrase is, and thus one pointed. One pointed can be translated as meditation. So then, what is the certainty? If you proceed on the basis of certainty, that is profound or well settled meditation. It is also one-pointed because it is free of duality. What is doubtful and what is certain? Whatever is objectively conceived or perceived is doubtful. But do you ever doubt your existence? There is never doubt regarding that. and the doubtless knowledge of your existence is inextricably one with the existence itself. Such blissfulness, such dearness, such liberation, such certainty, such one-pointed meditation is the very nature of Abidance Mukta. He knows himself as such. He need not think it. He knows. So, verse 7 reads, "The one who does not think, I indeed am Brahman, I indeed am consciousness, or I indeed am the one, and who remains purely as consciousness, is the Vidha Mukta." What is the meaning of I am Brahman? Certainly the thought of such is not the experience of the meaning. What is the meaning of I indeed am consciousness? Those words and the corresponding thoughts regarding such are most certainly not the experiential knowledge. I indeed am the one. If it is one, where is the need to think of it? Who remains purely as consciousness is the Vidha Mukta. Negate from your identity all that is objective, whether such be gross or subtle. And what remains? What remains knows itself. Brahman knows Brahman. The One Self knows itself. Pure consciousness. What does it look like? It does not look like anything. All pervasive, it is invisible. All knowing, it cannot be known as an object. All that has been said this evening about the nature of existence applies to consciousness. For existence and consciousness are the same thing. Likewise, bliss alluded to earlier. Being consciousness bliss is a threefold term for a single, undivided essence. And that you are. By realizing such about the state of Vidya Mukti, even while alive, you never die at all. Verse 8. Leaving aside, or it could be translated as completely abandoning, even the certitude that I am Brahman, and full of bliss is the Vidya Mukta. If all is abandoned in the certitude that I am Brahman, the vast absolute, and then even any notion, even the slightest concept of having such certitude is also abandoned. What remains? What remains is the innate. And abiding in and as the innate, one is full of bliss. As there is no obscuring of one's being, similarly, there is no veiling of the bliss. You can abandon all, but can you abandon yourself? You can abandon what you thought was yourself. Can you abandon yourself? Realize the self to be truly yourself, your only self. And the realization of such will not abandon you. Om Namah Shivaya. Shanti.